welcome to Community Connection. Today's guest is Kelly McBride, and she is the Executive Director for the Domestic Violence Network. Kelly, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay. Well, I think what we'll get started with first, tell me a little bit more about what the Domestic Violence Network actually does.
Yeah, absolutely. So at DVN, our mission is to change the culture that leads to domestic violence through advocacy, education, and collaboration. So we do our work through those three buckets. Our biggest one being education right now. We do a lot of educating of employers on how to recognize and respond to domestic violence. We're in our schools talking to young people about healthy relationships. We work on college campuses to talk about boundaries, healthy relationships, and domestic violence. We also do a lot of collaboration, and that will be with so many different sectors. So we work with the law enforcement, the police, and the judicial systems. We work with agencies like IvyCARES, IUPUI, the different higher eds, all sorts of different sectors, mental health, substance abuse, it's all tied in. So we have what's called a community-wide plan, where we just launched it in January of this year, and we're looking at how domestic violence disproportionately affects Black and African American women, and then also the LGBTQ community. So those are our two special populations and focuses for the next 3 to 5 years, really getting in there and exploring it, because we know that both of those communities are highly, highly affected by domestic violence and sexual assault.
Great. That's a lot to take in.
It is.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, but it lets us know how universal this issue is.
Mm-hmm.
In order for us to resolve it and come up with or problem solve it, we all have to be a part of it. By you telling me, all the different entities that you're working with, it tells me that we all have to be part of this solution.
Absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about COVID-19. Just a little.
Mm-hmm.
Since the pandemic, have you seen an uptick in cases, services? Have you seen where more people have had to access these services? And with doing that, are they seeking anything different than what you've seen in the past?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So COVID-19 is unprecedented. We've never seen anything like this before, and we are definitely seeing an uptick. IMPD has seen, on an average, 125% increase in calls, and in some zip codes, up to 200% in an increase in calls. So that's astronomical. And that does translate into more services. And what we're seeing and what victims are needing right now are protective orders and shelter.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing that the courts are still issuing protective orders virtually, so they'll be doing them over the computer with advocates and whatnot. So we do have that going, which is great. Mm-hmm. But shelter has been a problem. The Julian Center is our biggest shelter here in Marion County. Mm-hmm. And they had closed their doors to people. If you were there, you were there, but they wouldn't accept new people until just recently. And now they're at half capacity due to social distancing, right? So they're at full capacity, but that's half of what they normally could take. So DVN, in partnership with CICF, Families First, and the city of Indianapolis, actually set up a hotel fund. Okay. So if you're experiencing domestic violence and you are afraid for yourself and your children, you can call and get assessed and placed possibly into a hotel room. So that's our response to this crisis right now. And not only if our hotel is the shelter full, but they also are requiring 2 weeks self-isolation to make sure that you don't have COVID-19 before you come in and expose everyone else.
Okay.
But people are so scared. Why would you want to go to a shelter right now during this pandemic where you would be housed with, 10, 20, 30 other people? That's scary.
I can only imagine. Imagine. So are you saying that when you do get a new person that comes into the shelter or one of the shelters or a hotel, they have to be quarantined 14 days just
For
because?
the shelter part, not the hotel. So
Okay, okay,
yeah.
okay,
So that's our answer, is if we can get you into a hotel, and if we can get you into a hotel, maybe get you a protective order, you could probably return back to your home.
okay, okay,
And have the abuser put out of the home.
okay,
But if you need permanent housing, then that's something the advocates can work with you on too.
okay. Kelly, I'm just really curious. I mean, someone who maybe has not experienced physical or mental or emotional abuse before this situation, how do
Mhm.
you know where to go? I mean, how do they just instantly know? Because let me say this, while with domestic violence, it doesn't know any particular socioeconomic status, race, or um, gender. So with that being said, if it was the first time it happened, how would they know where to seek shelter?
Yeah, they might not, and they might not want to seek shelter if it's the first time it's happened too.
Hmm.
So one of the things that we have to remember as those who are helping victims of domestic violence, and victims of domestic violence have to know, is this is about power and control, right?
Hmm.
So the abuser is not always abusive. They use
Hmm.
that abuse to maintain that power and control over the person.
Hmm.
That can be verbal, emotional, sexual, physical. There are different levels of abuse and what that looks like,
Hmm.
but it's also a cycle. So the
Hmm.
first time it happens, the abuser is most likely going to be very remorseful and apologetic. And I'm so sorry, this will never happen again. And the victim, because they love the person, will believe that.
Hmm.
And they probably won't seek shelter. I mean,
Okay.
I would say most of the time, if it's the first time that it's happened, that you don't, because
Hmm.
you believe that they're going to change. And that's
Hmm.
why the cycle continues.
Okay. Okay.
Um, but when the victim finally does want to leave, it's
Hmm.
important to work with an advocate.
Okay.
um, 75% of all homicides that happen after they're leaving,
Mm.
because that's the ultimate loss of power and control. So
Okay.
working with an advocate to get a safety plan in place is absolutely detrimental. You have to
Okay.
have that.
So important. It really is.
Mhm.
Before we started, I talked to you a little bit about the perception of males that
Mhm.
go through abuse and how it's not necessarily very popular for a male to seek shelter, seeks help that's being abused in any relationship. If it be a female abusing the male or in other circumstances, are there specific, I guess, is there a specific type of marketing that, well, first of all, let me ask you, do you see that? Do you see very
Mhm.
many males that come in seeking support?
Mhm. Absolutely. So domestic violence happens to 1 in 3 women and 1 in 7 men,
Okay,
and that's reported. So we know it's probably higher than that.
okay.
Because while there's stigma and shame for women reporting domestic violence, which has lessened quite a bit with the Me Too movement, right, and all these social media movements that we've had in the past couple of years,
Hmm.
men are, I think, the stigma for men is even higher.
Hmm.
And so for them wanting to come out and report and say I'm a victim of domestic violence, our world is saturated in toxic masculinity. And so for a man to come out and say that, society almost says to him, well, then you're not a man.
Right.
And that's not true,
Hmm.
right? Abuse can happen to anyone,
Hmm.
male or female, but that's the
Hmm.
society we live in. It's
Hmm.
changing. I see it changing with the younger generations, but with the
Hmm.
older generations, that's still imprinted. And so
Hmm.
these male victims, I think they're suffering in silence, and we do
Hmm.
need to change that narrative,
Hmm.
that it's not okay, whether you're male or female, to
That's
be
right.
a victim of domestic violence. It's not okay. You don't have to live in that relationship and in that world.
Good. Yeah, that is so true. Um, Another piece I want to make sure I cover, because basically you guys know about where all the services are.
Hmm.
However, your real focus, it sounds like it's more of collaboration with
Mm-hmm.
organizations as well as education.
Correct.
So with that being said, in partnership with Ivy Tech, what would that look like if Ivy Tech wanted to pursue some type of partnership with the Domestic Violence Network,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit more involved than we already have? We do have coaches in our IvyCARES department that does know about services outside for domestic violence, but we need to probably look at this on a larger scale, on something a lot more broad at the
Mm-hmm.
college. What could Ivy Tech do along with the Domestic Violence Network to have some type of collaboration or partnership to make sure we can get the education out there?
Yeah. So I love this question. And just off the top of my head, a public awareness campaign would be phenomenal. So
Okay.
the highest, the age range where domestic violence occurs the most is 18 to 24, which is right in that college age. I know
Mm-hmm.
that Ivy Tech also has, non-traditional students come as well, but
Mm-hmm.
more of your focus is becoming that 18 to 24. So a
Mm-hmm.
public awareness campaign on campus, as well as, and that can include, what does domestic violence look like? What's Title IX?
Mm-hmm.
How do you reach a Title IX officer?
Mm-hmm.
Because students have rights when
Mm-hmm.
it comes to that.
Mm-hmm.
And then also training of your staff too,
Mm-hmm.
on how to recognize and respond to domestic violence. So if a student does come and disclose, you know what to do and
Mm-hmm.
how to respond and have policies in place. And we actually did this with IPS,
Mm-hmm.
Indianapolis Public Schools,
Mm-hmm.
and it's been phenomenal. It's been such a
Mm-hmm.
great response working with them.
It's really good to know.
Mm-hmm.
And after our interview, you and I will make sure that we have a follow-up to talk about moving forward with that kind of initiative. I think it would be
Yeah.
really important to do that. Now, when you said the training, I'm just curious, is there a certification process, or are you that meaning people who are trained in the best domestic violence and recognizing it and being an advocate? Are there any type of training certifications you can get for that?
There's not for domestic violence. There is for sexual assault. And
Okay.
as advocates, we've talked about having a certification for domestic violence advocates. And I don't know why we don't, because sexual assault does have that. So we should. But we offer the trainings not only to professionals such as yourself, but also to the domestic violence professionals on best practices when working with
Okay.
clients and different, populations of clients.
Well, and just so you know, and I think we've actually had your organization at our resource fair in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And just so you know, at IvyCARES, we formerly were the Early Resource Connection Center, and now we're called IvyCARES. But with that being said, with our student population, we have had students who have come in and made that report. And so I think it would be a great idea for us to go through more training and learn a little bit more how to recognize sometime what the student is not saying to us.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on where we get this feeling, but we're not sure what we're not sure. And then you don't want to come out and always say that, because that can be a kind of awkward moment. What are some of the ways we can look at a student who is not saying that? What are maybe some of the key things we should be looking at that they're not saying to
Mm-hmm.
a person who is suffering from some type of abuse?
Yeah, so I think with college-age kids, young adults, that this is going to look a little different than what my response would be for high school and elementary school kids,
Mm-hmm.
because they're young adults and they maybe are experiencing this like freedom that they've never had before. So my
Mm-hmm.
typical response would be like if they're skipping class or if they're falling asleep in class, but there could be other factors with that, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I think those are still things to kind of look out for as
Mm-hmm.
well. If there's excessive absences,
Mm-hmm.
especially if a student was, really participating and then suddenly their grades drop off and the absences,
Mm-hmm.
that can be a sign of domestic violence or mental health problems as well.
Mm-hmm.
Bruises, of course, wearing winter clothes, neck scarves and stuff like that in the summertime, or when the weather doesn't permit for that, are always, and that almost skittish, if a student's acting kind of skittish and scared almost, not wanting to talk to authority.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are different ways to look.
That would be extremely helpful for our team, because like I said, we see people in emergency situations, and they're typically financial emergency,
Mhm.
but along with the stress of finance, domestic violence, I have noticed can be very prevalent.
Mhm.
People just not knowing how to handle stressful situations. So it's just something that I think, while we just want to make sure we're covering all of our bases with our students when we're talking to them. And so I know that my team could really benefit from having some type of training and understanding what to be looking for, what we should be.
Mhm.
Kelly, last but not least, just want to say, is there anything extra that maybe we didn't cover today, or any kind of maybe a topic or an area that you think maybe a message you would like to get out there that maybe I didn't mention today or we didn't talk about? And um, I just always ask that question because as a person doing the interviewing, I know what's important to me, but you know what's important at the domestic violence
Mhm.
work. So tell me, is there anything we missed today that we didn't cover?
I think the biggest thing that I always say is, if you're in a domestic violence relationship, you're not alone. You don't have to be in that relationship, and you can call 211 to be connected to an advocate.
Okay, awesome. Kelly, thank you so much. I know
Yeah,
many conversations, you and I, before we talk, we have other issues, our concerns and challenges that we talked about that we may be covering from time to time. So I hope you feel comfortable that knowing that I may be reaching back out to you at another time
absolutely.
to cover some other areas. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you.
And we'll definitely be in touch. Thank
Okay,
you. All right, bye-bye.
bye.